Welcome back. No matter where people live, they share one thing. They all want a better life for themselves and for their children. Does the form of government they live under have an impact on those aspirations? And if so, how? Here to set the stage for this discussion is the former Prime Minister of Denmark, the former Secretary General of NATO, the founder of the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, and our host today, Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Anders.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to open this session together with the Atlantic Council and launch the Freedom and Prosperity Index. I've always been a strong believer in the tight connection between freedom and prosperity. It's great to see this report showing just that. It fits well with the Alliance of Democracies' own expeditionary economics program. This seeks to support economic reforms and entrepreneurship in emerging democracies. This aligns closely with the ambitions of the Atlantic Council's project. I completely agree with the report's major findings. Freedom and prosperity are closely linked. Freedom contributes to prosperity, and autocracies are generally not prosperous. I think it's important to have a global debate. I'm delighted to be doing this in collaboration with the Atlantic Council and the authors of this report, Negrea and Kroenig. I now turn the virtual floor over to Fred Kempe, the CEO of the Atlantic Council.
The Atlantic Council has just launched the Freedom and Prosperity Center to analyze some of the defining questions of our time and of all time. Do countries need freedom to achieve prosperity? What kind of freedom? Do democracies or autocracies have the better answers to the aspirations of the peoples of the world? What about Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and other countries that are not electoral democracies in the traditional Western sense, but have high levels of economic and legal freedoms and leaders who appear to enjoy a high level of legitimacy among their citizens? And while these questions are relevant for all countries, they are critically important for developing countries, and they are the focus of our new center. Central to the work of the new center is also the newly created Freedom Index and Prosperity Index. These indexes measure the freedom and prosperity, respectively, of nearly every country in the world. The 2021 indexes are the first, and we plan to produce them annually. The indexes can be used to inform policymakers about real-world opportunities in developing countries. The results indicate that freedom and prosperity are correlated, and that the most repressive autocracies of the world, think North Korea, think Iran, do not generate prosperity or well-being for their people. The authors argue that trends in this data over time, in conjunction with other historical evidence, suggest that greater freedom tends to result in more enduring prosperity. Yet, as these indexes show, there are also significant differences among traditional electoral democracies that are worth studying. One of the questions is why some democracies continue to thrive while others struggle to deliver for their people. The indexes are quantitative tools that will help researchers explore the best paths toward development while presenting sophisticated, relevant, and up-to-date benchmarks for decision makers, policymakers, and those advocating for reform around the world. As part of its mission and its vision for shaping the global future together, the Atlantic Council has identified 6 defining challenges of our time, including how best to strengthen weakening democracies in the face of expanding autocracy. This new Freedom and Prosperity Center, the Atlantic Council's 16th center, will contribute to addressing this challenge. US President Joe Biden has declared that the world is at an inflection point in this global competition, and that democracies need to prove that they can still deliver for their people, that they can still deliver the goods. This initial study provides reason for optimism. Democracies do indeed deliver. Thank you for your attention.
And now, to continue this conversation, let me introduce my panel. We have with us Dan Negrea. He is Senior Director of the Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council. Also here with us is Matt Kroenig. He's Deputy Director of the Scowcroft Center, also at the Atlantic Council. We do have virtual participants as well. Let me introduce them. Asanga is Chief Executive Officer of Denis and Lenora Foretia Foundation. Lakshmi Sampath Goyal is Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Civil Society, and Sergio Alcocer is the President of the Mexican Council for Foreign Affairs and a former Undersecretary for North America in the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you all for joining me, either in person or virtually. Dan, let me turn to you first. We want to know more about this project. Tell us about the project.
So before I talk about the project, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this event. They've done a splendid job. I would like to say how delighted I am to be on the same podium with you, an accomplished media person. Regarding the center, Fred did a fine job talking about what we would call the analytical side of our work. But the other side of our work is the advocacy side. So we do our analytical work and we reach our conclusions, and we published a report that is available in the hall. It's free of charge, so you can just pick up one. I'm not selling anything. It's available for anyone.
No books to hawk here?
That's next year.
Oh, okay.
But we have then the advocacy side. So what we want to do is we want to make a difference on the ground in developing countries. The focus of our work are the developing countries. So our target audience are decision makers in parliament or in government, media personalities, academics, and the citizenry at large. I'll give you an example of one of the things we want to do to implement things. We want to fund reforms that are presented by think tanks in developing countries to their parliaments, to their government, to change things on the ground. And we want our indexes to serve as a benchmark for decision makers, such that when they do their work, they know what things they can improve on the freedom side or on the prosperity side to improve the lot of the people. So now that we talked about the analytical side, let's go back to the analysis side. We produced a video that I would love to show to you to explain a little bit about how we are thinking about our indexes. So if you could play the video, please.
We all want prosperity for our families, communities, countries, and for the world. We want people to not only have food and shelter, but a good standard of living, education, healthcare, a fair society, and a clean environment. That's what we mean by prosperity. But what is the surest path to prosperity? Academics, policymakers, and citizens have been debating the matter for a very long time. Some say that free societies produce the best outcomes by unleashing the creativity and talent of individual citizens. Others say that focusing on the individual is too chaotic and ultimately inefficient. They argue that a strong central authority produces the best results. The new Freedom and Prosperity Center at the Atlantic Council, a think tank in Washington, D.C., contributes facts and figures to this debate through our inaugural 2021 Freedom and Prosperity Indexes. We built a freedom index to measure economic, political, and legal freedom in 174 countries. Each freedom reflects measurements of several indicators. Together, they create a comprehensive and unique measurement of freedom. We also built a companion prosperity index to measure income, health, the environment, treatment of minorities, and happiness in the same 174 countries. A prosperous society should be judged on more than just income per capita. Our index gives a holistic view of prosperity. In the first index, we rank countries into 4 tiers based on their total scores: free, mostly unfree, and unfree. In the second index, we rank countries as prosperous, mostly unprosperous, and unprosperous. We have 3 main takeaways from this data. Our first takeaway is that there is a strong correlation between the freedom and prosperity rankings. We show a 0.81 correlation between a country's ranking in the 2 indexes. This means high values of freedom are associated with high values of prosperity, and low values of freedom are associated with low values of prosperity. On average, the freer the country, the higher it will score in all 5 measures of prosperity. Income measures a country's domestic GDP combined with the net income of its citizens and companies abroad. Free countries are far and away the richest. Health measures the number of years a newborn infant would be expected to live at the time of her birth. People born in freer countries live substantially longer. Environment is measured through water quality. The scores indicate that freer countries have cleaner environments. Minority rights is measured through the acceptance of religious minorities. Less free countries are also less tolerant. The Citizen Happiness Indicator measures the psychological aspects of well-being. People in a prosperous society should be happy. Unsurprisingly, freer people are happier with their lives. This leads us to our second takeaway. Evidence suggests that freedom contributes to prosperity. We also examined the correlation between freedom and prosperity over time. If freedom is really driving prosperity, high levels of freedom in the past would be most strongly associated with high prosperity in the present, and that is exactly what we find. North and South Korea are a prime example. Both countries were poor in the 1950s. South Korea's leaders chose free market capitalism and secure property rights, while North Korea's leaders maintained a state-planned economy. Today, Koreans living in the free South are more than 50 times wealthier than those living in the unfree North. We saw the same thing with Germany. In 1950, democratic West Germany's GDP per capita was only about 1.5 times higher than that of communist East Germany. By the reunification of Germany 4 decades later, West Germany's per capita income had grown to be 3.6 times larger than East Germany's. China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong were all poor in the 1960s. They aspired to become high-income societies, which the World Bank defined as a GNI per capita above $12,695. China alleviated poverty and achieved middle-income status, but has been caught in the middle-income trap, while Taiwan and Hong Kong have escaped it. Our third takeaway is that autocracies generally fail to deliver prosperity for their people, while free countries succeed. Of the 30 countries ranked on the top of our freedom list, 21 are in the top category of our prosperity index, and 9 are in the next highest category. None are in the bottom 2 categories of prosperity. Of the 30 countries ranked at the bottom of our freedom index, 5 are in the lowest category for our prosperity index, 23 are in the next lowest category, and just 2 in mostly prosperous category. None are in the top prosperity category. Our indexes demonstrate that there is a strong relationship between freedom and prosperity, and we have reason to believe that improvements in freedom will, over time, lead to greater and more durable prosperity. You can find the full index rankings along with the report on the Atlantic Council website.
Because you said nice things about it, so thank you. But there are a lot of indexes out there. What makes this one different from the others?
Yeah, excellent question. I expected nothing less from you.
He continues. This is great. Matt, you've got to live up to this.
I have to work with him all the time. So.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of indexes. We arrived at our indexes from the questions that we asked. So we started with the question of, is freedom really necessary for prosperity? And in order to substantiate the analysis to get an answer, we did take a look at what existed out there, and there are excellent economic freedom indexes, there are political freedom indexes, but we felt that what we needed to do was to create, first of all, 2 companion indexes, one for freedom and one for prosperity, and look at them together and analyze the relationship between these 2 indexes. Then even looking at the freedom index itself, we decided to have 3 sub-indexes to it, one for economic freedom, one for political freedom, and one for legal freedom. While, again, other indexes look at only economic freedom or only at political. And on legal, I don't know that there is another index along these lines, and we actually struggled with the name for it. We considered calling it a governance index or an institutions index. We are trying to capture there the importance of the institutions to be the foundation for the other 2 freedoms that we are looking at. And on the prosperity index, normally people, when they think about prosperity, they think about money. When they think about countries, they think about income, GDP per capita. But as we also showed in the video, we are taking a comprehensive, holistic view of that and add other dimensions of prosperity, where we are essentially asking the question, what is the well-being, what defines the well-being of a country? What are all the things that a country that people want to live in should have? So we don't expect to have the final answer in a debate that has lasted that has been going on for centuries, but we hope that with our work we're contributing to the discussion.
Matt, can you put this in a strategic context for us?
Yeah, well, I think this work is important. As Fred Kempe said, President Biden has said we're at an inflection point in this battle between democracies and autocracies, and we need to show that democracies can still deliver for our people. And I think that's what this work does. It shows that democracies can deliver. After the end of the Cold War, there was this consensus that open market democracy was really the only legitimate way to organize a society. But it's been a bad 15 years or so for open market democracy. The financial crisis, China trumpeting state-led authoritarian capitalism as an alternative model. Many would-be dictators around the world looking to China as a solution. And I think many in the West also losing confidence in ourselves and in our own model and questioning, maybe the system doesn't work, maybe China's onto something. And so I think what these findings show is that no, our system does work, it does generate prosperity. And often we value democracy because of freedom and human rights, and we should, but I think what this shows is that democracy is also instrumentally useful. It's effective, and so we can regain our confidence. And I think for people in the developing world, if they want sustainable prosperity, that they should choose free systems.
Well, let's find out how that message resonates in other parts of the world. Free, why don't we start with you. Tell us how this might be received in Africa.
Thank you so much. I think that if we look at the ranking, it is a true reflection of the African continent. The results actually prove that we have just 2 free countries, and it's not surprising that there's no prosperous country in Africa. You know, what is really captivating to us is that when you look at the indices, you will find that most African countries are ranked under the mostly unfree category and under mostly on.
Ooh, free, we
Freedom and.
You're back with us. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm saying that when we look at the classification of African continents, countries, it actually confirms the correlation between freedom and prosperity. So what is the take-home for that? On the African Union Agenda 2063 is looking at the prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. But what this indices is telling us is that the focus now should be on freedom, because if we agree with the correlation, if we have a free Africa, then by 2063, we will have a very prosperous Africa on the continent. Going further into the indices, when we look at the freedom indices, you see there's a disparity from country to country. But what comes out clearly is that political freedom, African countries rank the lowest when it comes to political freedom. And if the focus is made on political freedom, then we can be sure that this will kickstart maybe a lead to legal and economic freedom. And so what I would conclude is to say that for those of us in the civil society space, the call to action now should be on the attainment of political freedom on the continent, which will definitely lead to prosperity in the years to come.
Lakshmi, what about the view from Asia?
Thank you, Jeanne, and the Atlantic Council and the Copenhagen Democracy Summit for having me here today. So Asia as a whole provides an excellent proof of concept for the core message in the Atlantic Council's Freedom and Prosperity report, essentially that freedom contributes to prosperity, or rather, the absence of freedom denudes a country and her people of prosperity. Now, for Asia as a whole, which is home to many former colonies, history provides ample evidence, and no statistic illustrates this better than the stark fact that India, before colonization in 1700, accounted for 24.4%. That's right, about a quarter of world GDP, and her share was down to just circa 4% in 1950 when the colonizers left. What matters now, however, is that the free countries, what the free countries achieved with their sovereignty. And Singapore, although kind of a smallish country in terms of its geographic spread, is a great example of a prosperous nation by sheer grit and determination, having almost no natural resources. Myanmar at independence in 1948, on the other hand, was richly endowed with natural resources and had arguably fine intellectual capital in the form of educated elites. Ruled mostly by the military junta, her growth has been stunted relative to her neighbors. Now, specific to the findings of the report, there is a strong correlation between freedom and prosperity. And while, of course, correlation is not necessarily causation, economic theory and political thought do support the notion that causation is possible. And to begin with, the difference in incentives of democratic and autocratic administration strengthens the claim that freedom promotes prosperity, as autocracies would typically be extractive. Divergent paths and destinies of neighbors, North and South Korea has been spoken about, others such as India, Pakistan, etc., demonstrate this point beautifully. Bhutan is a success story, having transitioned in 2008 from absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, with establishment of an elective legislature. Now, the jump in Bhutan's prosperity scores are in consonance with this theme. I think I'll kind of just touch upon another important finding in the report, and which is that those with high freedom and lower prosperity need to be looked at from a forward-looking perspective. So India, Vietnam, Philippines are examples of those countries that are fundamentally poised to grow in the next decade, with freedom being an enabling factor in promoting productivity, enterprise, and overall prosperity.
Lakshmi, thank you. Sergio, it's your turn to go. Tell us about Latin America and how it might receive the information in this report.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon in Europe, good morning from the Americas, and I want to congratulate the Copenhagen Democracy Summit for this very interesting session, and of course to congratulate the Atlantic Council for the development of this project and also the implementation of the project through a well-established center. So this is certainly a great news for everyone that is interested and actually is looking for strengthening democracy, freedom, and prosperity. Latin America is a region with 650 million inhabitants. And Latin America and the Caribbean is characterized by its cultural, linguistic, and ethnic diversity, with also distinctly different regimes, political processes, economic and social policies. We have been, in the recent times, a large divergence in political regimes, and this is quite obvious throughout the region. You can look from Nicaragua and Cuba all the way to liberal democracies like, for example, Chile. And recent changes then are imposing new challenges to its young liberal and electoral democracies. That's the case in Mexico, Brazil, compared to Haiti or Cuba, as I just mentioned. I think this report is very timely, not only because we are having the Summit of the Americas in the United States, and many of these issues are being discussed, but also I would like to touch upon the importance of indexes. And I think indexes are quite relevant, particularly for public policy and improving the standard of life, if these indexes are relevant because they come up with from indicators and data that are objective and unbiased. And this is particularly important when we are approaching different governments that will be sort of reluctant to look into this with a different view, with a different scope. So in this regard, I find the freedom and prosperity indexes that are proposed by the Atlantic Council to be quite relevant because they are not politically motivated or they are not tailored under any pre-assumed ideology. I think that's very important to be expressed. So in this regard, I think that indexes could be considered to serve a dual purpose. On the one hand, it will help us to benchmark the status of a society or a societal challenge, and it will also help us to design public policies to solve a problem or to manage a situation with support of follow-up and assessment mechanisms. So in this regard, I think the indexes will be very welcomed in the region in the sense that it will help us to move into a more collective way of implementing regional solutions and initiatives and to identify these column challenges with shared approaches and best practices. So I think in this regard, the freedom and prosperity indexes could be of great help in order to tailor public policies and particularly the participation of the civil society.
Thank you, Sergio. Of course, whenever we're talking about prosperity and economic development, China is the elephant in the room. So, Dan, I'd like to know how China fared in as a model of development when you looked at this.
Yeah, well, Jeanne, we looked at China two ways in our indexes, and I have to say that neither review ended up with China as a model of development for anyone. So the Chinese Communist Party has been ruling China for 70 years now. And if we looked just at GDP per capita, you saw in the video, comparing where China, mainland China, People's Republic of China, is compared with Hong Kong and Taiwan, countries that chose freedom, China underperformed. If you look even more broadly, globally, if you take a ranking on the GDP basis, China is about 70, 75 or so. Taiwan, Hong Kong are in their 30s, and another neighboring East Asian country, Korea, is also in the 30s. So just looking at GDP per capita, they didn't do very well. Their history is really clear in terms of the period when China had success was the period of the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, the 30 years of reform. But that period may very well be now at an end with the reversal of those reforms in the days of President Xi. But our indexes, as mentioned before, take a more holistic view looking beyond GDP per capita. In the Freedom Index, China ranks 140, and in the Prosperity Index, it ranks 114. That's out of 170 countries. An interesting way to think about why it ranks so low in the Prosperity Index is to take the 5 components that we have in the Prosperity Index. In terms of income, health, even environment, China is about middle or slightly above middle. But then we are measuring another thing also, which is treatment of minorities. And we measure that with treatment of religious minorities. On that measurement, China is almost at the very bottom because of the genocide against the Uyghurs. So I guess to put it simply, in our index, if you take part of your population and put them in concentration camps, no, you're not going to be a prosperous country. And looking at the 2 ways we looked at China, the conclusion is, no, they're not a model of development.
I would like to go back to our virtual participants here and ask you about the role of international organizations and what they should do, could do to promote freedom as a path for development. Lakshmi, why don't I start with you?
Thank you, Jeanne. So actually, Asia's road to prosperity does lie in strengthening the values of freedom and in collaboration within, as well as in collaboration with the developed nations. So international agencies and organizations do play a very big role in supporting socially, commercially, and technologically. And this is simply because it's critical for the whole world, because if Asian countries slow down, the world will lose its growth engine. It's about how to work together, competing and cooperating at the same time, I would say. And I think the biggest help that Asia could get is in resolving the largest Asian divide today, and which is present in various quantum across the countries in Asia, in the form of social polarization, which is driven by religion, in some cases ideology, and in most cases wealth inequities. And this has been made all the more apparent by the pandemic, and these can only be mended by strengthening the economic, legal, political freedoms of the diverse cultures within Asia with cooperation from the developed countries and organizations.
Free, your thoughts on whether international organizations have a role to play here?
Yes, I think they have a role to play, but Africa is quite unique in the sense that we are still living in the post-colonial era where you still have the colonial tentacles deeply rooted in Africa. So it becomes very difficult to have that direct intervention to assist African countries. Or if you ask me, I would propose, and I think that what needs to be done for Africa to have really freedom is this international community discussing with the colonial permit me use the word masters of Africa, because at the moment we cannot truly have a political freedom when we are over-reliant on colonial masters. And in order to have that political freedom, which is going to trigger the other freedoms on the continent, the colonial masters have to be brought on board. And this is very pronounced in Francophone Africa as opposed to the English-speaking or Africa. So that is really a problem which needs to be addressed. And I think that the international community as a whole is addressing that if we need to come out and have a freer Africa.
Sergio, do you want to weigh in very quickly on this question of international organizations and whether they should be promoting this message of a linkage between freedom and prosperity?
I think they should do. However, I think that in order in Latin America to have a much broader impact, you need to engage with local organizations. If you look at what happens in Latin America based on the Freedom and Prosperity Index, there is certainly a correlation, like Lakshmi and Free mentioned, both from Asia and from Africa. Particularly in the case of Latin America, the weakness is on the legal freedom. That means that we need to have more effective judicial power, and we need to have government integrity, better regulatory policies, better order and security, and actually the state capacity has to be improved. And this is something that has to be built within our own countries. And certainly international cooperation, international partnerships and advocacies are important, but we need to empower local organizations, particularly civil society, to put within our own states in order to improve, as I said, state capacity.
Matt, let me throw a last question at you. There was something raised earlier about whether this was correlation or causation. Which is it?
I think there's a positive feedback loop. I think it's probably going both ways, but I think there's a lot of economic theory and a lot of evidence showing that at least part of the direction is from, and I think the majority of the direction is going from freedom to prosperity. So we showed some of those kind of natural experiments of similar peoples with two different systems imposed on them during the Cold War and after, and their different trajectories. But we really were standing on the shoulders of giants in doing this study. This is something that people have been debating, Plato, Adam Smith, for millennia. But I think the emerging conventional wisdom in economics is that you need good institutions to have economic growth, and that you're unlikely to get good economic institutions unless you have good political institutions and freedom. There may be one or two exceptions. Singapore is the one that people point to, but basically freedom is almost a necessary condition for enduring prosperity.
And we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for this important report. Matt and Dan, thank you both for joining us here in Copenhagen, and to our remote panelists, Free, Sergio, and Lakshmi. Thank you all for being with us here today.